Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to each one. And thank you for joining us in today's side event as part of the 20th UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Today's event, Women and Girls Homelessness and the SDGs in Indigenous Communities, is envisioned and co-sponsored by the Society of the Sacred Heart and UNANIMA International. Can everyone hear me okay? Is this volume good?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, good. We begin by acknowledging that wherever we are sitting on the traditional land of its first peoples. I'm zooming in from Lenape land in Manhattan, New York, and we acknowledge all Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have lived in reciprocity with Mother Nature throughout the generations. And this calls us today, here and now, to continue to learn how to be better relatives to each other and to the land which we inhabit. I am Sheila Smith, and I am the UN representative for the Society of the Sacred Heart, which is a women's faith-based organization of about 2,500 women throughout the world in 40 countries. One of our main areas of concern in our 220-year history is quality education and empowerment of women and girls, particularly those who are marginalized by social systems. Personally, I have lived and or worked with Indigenous peoples in Canada for over 30 years. I'm also the keeper of this talking stick that you can see here for a group of Ojibwe grandmothers in Northern Ontario, Canada, who have asked me to find ways to bring their voice to the United Nations. And I have the honor of introducing one of them to you right now, Grandmother Isabel Mewasagi, who is an elder of the Serpent River First Nation. She's a grassroots woman leader who is highly specialized in cultural and healing services. As a community grandmother, a ceremonialist and healer, she is accompanying us today in this event on homelessness. Grandmother Isabel will open and close our gathering today in a ceremonial way. Grandmother Isabel, please open this session for us now.
Good morning, everybody. It's such an honor to be sitting with the people here. And yes, I'm called Isabel Mewasagi, and I'm a Bear Clan woman of the Serpents Band of Ojibwe, which is in Northern Ontario, where I live. I work here as an elder, a wisdom keeper, a grandmother, a healer, and a teacher for the next generations of Ojibwe people. So as I said, I'm so blessed and honored to be sitting here talking to the world. And my people, the way they pray and the way they think is that they use every opportunity to ask for blessing from the spirit world to help us with whatever work we've got to do. And part of that, the blessing that we're asking for is the lighting of our sacred smudge, what they call the smudge, but it's actually medicines that we burn. And all that smoke goes out to the spirit world. It goes out to all the communities and all the people that are suffering all around the world. So I'm going to light that smudge, and then I'm going to say a prayer also to begin our proceedings here today. So I have my medicines going now. So what I want to do is I want to use that sacred smoke to cover my mind, my memories, my eyes, my ears, and my mouth, so that I can speak some sacred words today that will reach the hearts of the people that are listening. and I cleanse my throat so that everything that comes out of my heart will be something good that somebody can use. And my shoulders, I don't want to carry nobody else's stuff on my shoulders. So I take that sacred smoke and I bless my shoulders and my heart and my whole body. And and now I'm going to speak the words. My people here on this reservation that I live on, they believe that we are never alone. You are not alone. And they think that we have helpers from the spirit world or the non-human world. And right now we would begin our prayer by calling out to our ancestral helping spirits, especially those who have lived well and those that have died well, and all that is good and beautiful in our ancestral line as a legacy that we can draw upon. I call upon these men and women who didn't do everything perfectly, but they rose to the challenges of their times, and they held true to that which is very deep and which is very meaningful and eternal in our understanding of how human beings lived here on this earth, and those who are willing to risk and to heal and to move on and do things a little bit differently than they were done before. I call upon those ancestors with their reconciled lives to be here with us today. Please stand behind us with a firm hand on our backs and help us by giving us a little shove to let us know that you have our backs. And to these ancestors, we are deeply, deeply grateful. And I call them in so that we may receive the support that we need so that we might do what we need to do for our old people and our babies and for those that are still coming. And I reach out to the beyond, to call out to the first family of creation to be with us today and every day, and to help us to remember our own spiritual nature. Help us stay true to the passion that moves us in our lives to do what is unique in our lives. Let us be the women that we came here to be. We call out to the non-human helping spirits to be with us as we walk through the challenges in the days and the weeks and the months ahead. So I say, Miigwech, thank you for helping me with this prayer. Thank you, Miigwech.
Miigwech, Grandmother Isabel, thank you very much for opening our session today and for clearing this space for us. We are honored and grateful for your presence and your prayers as you hold that space for us during this session. It is now my pleasure to introduce the UN representative and my colleague, UN representative for our co-sponsor, UNANIMA International, Jean Quinn, who is a daughter of wisdom. Jean is the executive director for UNANIMA International, a coalition of 22 member communities with over 22,000 members in 85 countries throughout the world. Jean has spent many years working with individuals and families who experience homelessness. She is the founder of Sophia Housing in Ireland, which offers a holistic approach to women and children journeying from homelessness. Currently, Jean is the co-chair of the UN working group, NGO working group to end homelessness. She was also one of the specialists who attended the UN expert group meeting on affordable housing and social protection systems for all to address homelessness, which was held in Nairobi in May 2019. So I now turn it over to you, Jean, to welcome all of us to this event today.
Thank you so much, Sheila. But thank you so much, Isabel, Grandmother Isabel. just hold that wisdom keeper figure blessing with us during this gathering, as it's very special. And from a Daughter of Wisdom, as Sheila said, I'm part of the community of the Daughters of Wisdom. It's very special to hear you talk about the wisdom keeper. And in preparation for today, Isabel, yesterday we said the smudging prayer at our working group to end homelessness meeting in French, Spanish, Irish, and English to bring this blessing on today's event. I start by welcoming this event as part of our commitment to shine a light on homelessness in all its forms. At this session, we are remembering and honouring the leader and activists, past and present, who have long advocated for the rights of Indigenous peoples. The good news is that we have a declaration, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This declaration is about our collective histories and lived experiences. It's about our struggles, it's about our lives today and future generations. It is a living document made of history, memory, hope, justice, peace, and spirit. Like our journey on homelessness these past number of years, and indeed my own journey over 30 years, we call on governments to form partnerships with us to advance the rights of this agenda. But for all of us on this webinar today, let us use the declaration as a very important framework. We have to keep our foot on the pedal and continue advocating for the rights of all people. We are still living in a time of persisting vulnerability and exclusion, and most especially among women, children, and girls. I feel privileged to be here today, honouring my Indigenous sisters and brothers, and I am looking forward to hearing all the reflections on our topic today, which is women and girls, homelessness, and the SDGs in Indigenous communities. And as I always say at the end of any event, please don't talk about us without us. We need the lived experience. So everybody, you're most welcome to be with us today. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you for highlighting the importance of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as part of the framework that needs to be applied as we move forward with all issues, and that the voices of Indigenous peoples need to be at the table, not only in their sharing experience, but also in making policies and decisions. So I'd also like to thank you for your expertise and your leadership in the area of homelessness, your tireless commitment to raising awareness and impelling us all to advocacy, especially the hidden forms of homelessness, is obviously making an impact in your own country of Ireland, but also globally. So thank you very much, Jean.
Sheila.
Now I will briefly introduce each panelist before they present and have them give their perspective on today's topic, which is women and girls homelessness and the Sustainable Development Goals in Indigenous communities. Following all the presentations, we will move to questions from the audience. And these questions you may put in the chat box, or you can use the raise hand function if you would prefer to speak. Our panelists today will bring a gender perspective to the experience and definition of Indigenous homelessness. They have asked that we keep in mind the reality that they do not speak for all Indigenous persons or peoples. as every individual and communal context is unique and complex. That which we will hear today is a very small portion of the experience of homelessness by Indigenous persons globally. However, we need to also keep in mind that each one of our panelists has something crucial to add to the conversation. First, we will hear from Akikwe. She is here to speak about her personal experience of homelessness. Akikwe is from Treaty 61 territory, located in Ontario, Canada. She's a knowledge carrier of human trafficking and has firsthand knowledge of how to keep girls aware. Akikwe's visions are to end missing and murdered Indigenous women and Canada's Indian Act, to stop her people on Turtle Island from straying from the sacred way of life, to bring all girls back to their homes, and to achieve justice. Today, Akikwe tells her story all over Turtle Island. Akikwe says, silence is violence, and we must idle no more. Akikwe, the floor is yours. We are listening to you.
Oni everybody. Akikwe Nadishnakaz, Kitagan TV, Wininjaba, Mayenga Nadoram. That means my name is Akikwe. I'm from Garden River First Nation, and my clan is Wolf Clan. So I'm here today to talk about Indigenous homelessness. I have a lot of experience from being homeless in my past. So being the land that we're on, all over Turtle Island was inhabited by First Nation people. And this land isn't ours, it's the animals' home. And it's our job to protect their home and our home. So the Robinson-Huron Treaty was signed on September 9th, 1850, with an annuity of payment of $160. In 1874, the annuity payment increased to $4, but has not changed since. Will we be able to add 2021 as a year of meaningful compensation for treaty beneficiaries? Our people are in poverty, the chiefs say. Our treaties are broken. If our treaties were paid, a lot of us could buy a house and some land to live on. Landlords don't like Indigenous people, I find, and lots of us are sick of renting. My name is Akikwe, which means Earth Woman, and I don't even have a connection to the land for years and years and years. So I've been just trying to make truth and reconciliation of the land, connecting myself back to the land. My grandfather used to tell us about pipelines and their broken treaties when we were kids, and I didn't believe it. He would tell us that they took him away from his home and he never seen his parents ever again. Today, there are pipelines all over the land, even under the Great Lakes in Canada, threatening our home, our clean water, our drinking water, our soil. There's mercury in the water, and we have to watch what we eat now. The Great Lakes and Turtle Island have been inhabited by Indigenous people for millions of years. For example, Turtle Island's story is estimated to be 20 million years old, when the earth was in one piece called Pangea. Without clean air, water, and soil, we will go extinct. On top of this, Indigenous people are suffering homelessness like it's a normal thing and it's hidden. Our family do it to us, or the system does it to us. I personally ended up in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, after the system shipped me out of the prison. And while I was being shipped out, they promised me that I would get home and they'd buy my bus ticket home, which was a lie. It was so hard to get out of the lifestyle that I ended up in. After I got released from prison, the guards promised me that I would get home, and that was a lie. So after that, the system put me in a cell with a girl that was being trafficked by a notorious Toronto drug dealer and pimp. So when I got out, I fell right into the hands of this man. It was so hard to get out of the lifestyle. Like, I can't stress enough how hard it is to get out of that life they call human trafficking, or in the streets they call it the game. Honor the treaties across Turtle Island. We need what's entitled to us. We are being murdered. We are going missing. We are getting beaten. We are being branded. We are being bought and we're being sold like cattle across Turtle Island. This trafficking happens from the North Pole all the way to the South Pole. The guy that sexually abused me and trafficked me is now banned from the Treaty of Paris, the Treaty of 61. That estimates is the whole almost 18,000 hectares. And I did that for my women, our people, so that he couldn't hurt us anymore. I almost lost my foot when I was arguing with the trafficker one day because he was telling me to leave the apartment and I wouldn't leave. So I almost got my foot cut off from this guy for a place to live, and I lived. Now I'm here today telling my story, how I survived being homeless, being under genocide, colonial violence, domestic violence, human trafficking, and the list goes on. In my opinion, what makes a home is love connection with people, with kinship, and then of course the structure of habitation. I would also say that home is a connection to the land and culture and spirituality. Our homelessness is really about disconnection from healthy relationships over time due to colonial interruption, through policy, through crowding out infrastructure, stealing our land, loss of our culture through residential schools, from our kinship structures. All these things, plus many, many more, are what Indigenous homelessness is. There is a lot of gangs out there that are youth and they need help. When systems are broken, this is what happens. Like Senator Murray St. Clair said, the next generation will not be good. We will have an uprising. And I think we're starting to see that already. There is a huge drug pandemic out there also that is happening across Turtle Island and killing us. Nothing is being done. People are killing each other through this overdose method. People who use drugs aren't even recognized as human beings up here. I witnessed it, and it's destroying our families. Dreams are being sold to our girls out there, and it's not right. I spend a lot of time preventing human trafficking to our youth and children, but it's still out there. Like, it's so bad. The age of consent is ridiculous. Men have sex with underage girls all the time, and it's a normal thing. It happens to homeless girls a lot. Women are selling their bodies to provide a home to themselves or families, and it's normalized. Women sell their bodies so they have somewhere to stay. When renting places, the discrimination is disgusting. I can't even find a place to live while I started putting a teepee up at my house, and the landlord came and started talking about it. So I took it down and I never put my teepee back up for ceremony at my house. We can't even do ceremonies without anyone going after us. Landlords in Canada are awful. I will be going to live at a hotel next month if I can't find a place to live because the landlord doesn't like Native people. Throughout the whole pandemic, I had a hard time securing a home for my boys and I. We lived in hotels for months, for a while, which was awful. When does this end? When do we have to stop running? It would be a blessing if my treaties got paid. I could pay my debt and buy a house, and all of that will go away. How much longer will we wait? Another 100 years, another 200 years? We are going through genocide and a system that is out to destroy and conquer us. Animals are suffering a lot right now too on the land. We are the grandchildren of residential school survivors and have went through our own genocide as women. Let's abolish the Indian Act on Turtle Island, because from the North America to the South America, we are under attack, and the next 7 generations home is at great risk. So that's my speech for homelessness. And I've tied that back to couple centuries ago, because we've been homeless, we've been displaced, we've been spread out like this, like a nuclear bomb. My family's from United States of America, down in Minnesota, and I don't even know them. We've been trying to connect ourselves back to our people for so long, and we just can't find them. The Indian Act split us up, and destroyed us. My family today, a majority of them are all homeless. They're homeless, they're on drugs, they're being abused by men out there, and it's all interconnected together. You know, if we honored these treaties and helped get these treaties honored, then we could have somewhere to live, we could pay debts, you know, and we could move forward in regards to truth and reconciliation. Homelessness is tied to everything. While I was homeless, I got attacked, I got sexually assaulted. One time this guy hit me with a stick cracking my arm in half. You know, I've had to hang around with bad guys out there who are killing people. I've watched them shoot people, stab people, you know, punch girls' teeth down their throats. You know, girls are suffering out there. Lots of people from my treaty, they go down to Toronto, Ontario, and they die. You know, that lots of youth out there are parentless. They don't have parents, you know, and most of them are dying, or they're just not around. You know, our families are so broken, they're destroyed. But not all of them, not all of them. Will I ever take this back, all the stuff that I went through? I would never take it back, because I had to go through this in order to figure out why I exist here on Turtle Island. So now I'm a knowledge carrier to protect women, to protect the future, you know, to help make a little dent in combating human trafficking, or MMIW, colonial violence. Right now, what was ruled with MMIW is that we are going through genocide. Considering me as a Native woman going after the human trafficker that almost killed me, and MMIW happening on Turtle Island, is a huge thing for me. And it dawned on me not long ago, I'm like, wow, I got justice. I stood up and fought for our woman. I sacrificed myself for our people. And I thought I put a stop to that guy, to stop hurting our women, you know, and considering MMIW happening, and this guy who wants to kill me out there, you know, I'm still alive, I'm breathing, I'm happy, I could laugh every day, you know, I could protect my sisters, protect our people. Our chief of Garden River and police sergeant are the one that honored me, a knowledge carrier, when they welcomed me home. Sister Sheila was part of that, and they welcomed me home to the treaty, and it was beautiful. Something that has to happen across Turtle Island, you know. If you could escape MMIW and turn your life back around, you know, there is a rainbow on the other side, you know. The elders are always there to help us, the grandmothers, grandfathers. I'm here, you know, and this is just a little bit of my story and what I endured. I would never wish that on anybody else. So Miigwech for having me here. I could share my speech with everybody in the chat or Google. I have a PowerPoint presentation too that I could share in the chat. And I thank you very much for having me here today. And it's been an honor to speak for the Ojibwe people in regards to some of our problems out there that are all connected. So Miigwech, Sister Sheila, and everybody else that is here. And it's an honor. Miigwech.
Miigwech to you, Akikwe. It is our honor, really, to listen to you. Thank you for teaching us so much in this short time. Some of the things that you have raised has really heightened our awareness to what has been normalized in so many of our societies, that homelessness is tied to everything. You have shown that you know, Indigenous women and girls who suffer homelessness, that it's related to human rights violations that occur not only throughout one's whole life, but throughout the history of a whole people that have experienced genocide in contexts like Canada. But thank you also for bringing the hope that you bring with your message. I think you have really shared with us the strength of your person and how you have managed to gather and find that strength through your cultural ways. So thank you very much. And we wish you all the best in your work as you journey forward as somebody who gives strength to others who are also experiencing these things. So now it is my honor to introduce Dolores Pelletier. Dolores was born and raised in Wikwemkong, a community of the Three Fires Confederacy tribe, Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi. Dolores is a wife, mother, and grandmother who is also involved in her community of Ottawa, Canada, where she now resides. Dolores has a background in finance and brings to this conversation 23 years experience working at Gignul Nonprofit Housing Corporation as a tenant relations officer. Dolores, the floor is yours, and we are now listening to you. We're just going to put up your PowerPoint
Perfect.
here, Dolores.
Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people here in Ottawa. And one of the things that I would like to share is that many of us women who have been going through the colonization and the assimilation, some of us have not lived the traditional way of life. I brought my feather, and I noticed that Akikwe has also had her feather as well too, as well as Isabel. I have my feather as well too. I'm learning as an individual who has not lived the traditional way of life. Therefore, I'm trying to learn just as a child would learn. So first of all, I want to say, who are we? We are grandmas, we are aunties, mothers, and also sisters who are regarded as matriarchs in our culture. And that we are the caregivers and protectors. But unfortunately, in the colonial context, we're not viewed the same. The European influence disrupted the traditional roles of women being caretakers of the water, the land, and the environment, just as Akikwe had mentioned. Now we're talking about missing and murdered Indigenous girls. Why is that happening? Why do we have homeless women? Next screen. Some of the statistics that I'd like to share with you is that a lot of this information that I've researched is through the Native Women's Association of Canada. And back then they were called Aboriginal people. Now, we have reverted over to being called Indigenous people. A lot of times that's kind of what the government has identified us as. Identifying Aboriginal or Indigenous people are First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. And we are overrepresented in the homeless population of Canada. There are more women who are homeless than the non-Indigenous population. We have 634 First Nation communities, also called reserves. And most of the people are, across the country. We have the Inuit that live in the northernmost region of Canada, and we also have Métis who are of European descent and of Indigenous. Now, within the homelessness population for Indigenous people, in large urban centers, there are at least 20 to 50% of the total homeless population across this country, which is pretty sad that most of us are Indigenous people who are visible or sometimes invisible as homeless. Invisible homelessness includes people who are couch surfing, people who are staying with friends, and even family. Now, you'll notice that homeless population across this country, 90% in the northern communities, you'll see 90% of the people that are homeless because of isolation, because of unsecured or unaffordable housing. You'll see about 50% in areas such as Thunder Bay or Winnipeg. So you'll see 50% of the homeless population that are Indigenous. And only in Toronto do you see 15%. And that's because of the numbers of the per capita in Toronto. There are more people there, so they are not as visible, whereas in smaller communities they would be. Now, in terms of the residential schools, this is where it began hundreds of years ago, how our people were displaced and how we've been suffering through intergenerational trauma. And it has been revealed that homelessness is a common cause of the residential school. Historical trauma, such as reduced health, mental health, and the emotional harm that has been suffered by our people, spiritually, as well as physical and mentally. The colonization, which is the political control of Indigenous lands and its exploitation amongst the people. And it's marginalized Indigenous populations, which has affected many of our people. The 60s scoop, where children were being taken away from their families, placed in white foster homes. The child welfare system has led to families being dysfunctional, causing substance abuse, addictions, health issues, lateral violence. And we still suffer that with many of our Indigenous communities where the child welfare system is a problem. It is a huge problem. Many of our children are still being taken away. Social issues leads to high incarceration and high suicide rates among our people and in our communities. Still to this day, there are an overrepresentation of high incarceration in prisons and jails, and the suicide rate still continues to this day especially amongst our young people. And homelessness amongst the women is a direct result of domestic violence. And I think it was very important that, and it was just the way that it started off this morning, how Akikwe had started off with her story, just so it gives you some idea of what has happened to our women and is still happening to our women. Shelters are at maximum capacity and with overflow in motels, which is not safe for our women fleeing violence. Putting somebody in a motel, just basically it's an open door where perpetrators can find these women who are fleeing abuse. Shelters, yes, are something that can be used, but it's not a solution. We need more services for our women who are fleeing, who are having difficult challenges with violence, with abuse, with human trafficking. Being homeless is not the way for our women. And rent at the same time is between 30 and 50% of household income, which leaves very little for basic needs, such as food, clothing, and communication. Communication nowadays is very important to our women. Cell phones, every woman would have a cell phone. That way, if they are in danger, or if they need to contact family, or if they need to contact friends, if they're in unsafe situations, they need to have that cell phone. So it's considered a basic need. Okay, next slide. Now, from what I've seen in the years of experience working with Giggle Nonprofit Housing, we are an Indigenous urban housing provider. I've been here for 23 years, and we've seen many families and individuals that have come through our door, coming from small, isolated communities, looking for a better life. Youth who are trying to obtain a good education or employment opportunities. So these are good motivators. These are the good stories that we like to hear. But also there's others who are looking to escape violence and start a new life. Supports are not always there, therefore leading them to homeless. This also makes causes a disconnect for our women because shelters are not available on reserves or are limited. The shelters are mainly located in urban centers or communities that are off reserve, which does not help our women because they have to be disconnected from their family, their community, and their land. And living in a mainstream society does not help because they don't understand the situation of our women. They don't understand who we are. We are the people of the land. We are very close to the animals, the spirits, and they don't see that. So they always see a problem. There's landlord discrimination. When there's, as Akikwe mentioned, that it's very difficult looking for housing. Searching for housing means going to look at apartments, calling, and this is what we're facing here today. People call looking for housing. Yes, the apartment is ready. It's available. Come and take a look at it. They get there. Oh, sorry, it's just been rented. What does that mean? I just called you half an hour ago and you're telling me that it's not available. As soon as they see that you're an Indigenous woman, they are discriminating. The conditions of the housing, both on and off reserve, are substandard and in most cases overcrowded. Basic living conditions, no clean drinking water and or indoor plumbing, which is a very sad situation, and we should not have to live like that. So it's really difficult to share these kinds of stories when you see a lot of the women that are faced with homelessness. When you're not given any direction as you grow up, and this is just something from my own personal situation, when you're not given direction or life lessons in terms of basic skills or lack of parenting that you live from, then you just basically live the life from your peers. Where do you fit in? Where do you belong? How do you move forward? Many times these women are lost. They don't know, they don't have that direction. That we have to get back to our traditions where the grandmothers, the aunties are there for us, or our traditional keepers, knowledge keepers, our elders especially. Where will they help us to bring us to where we need to be? So in closing, I just want to say that, you know, homelessness is not just about the roof over your head, but it's also having the connections to human interaction, to the people that we meet, the people that are in our lives, our family, our friends, our community, to the land, to the animals, and to the water. It is our ancestors and our spirit, the spirits, the ancestors that are there for us. And then we acknowledge our connections, our traditions, and our culture, which maintain who we are, the Anishinaabe, and that's who I am, Anishinaabe. When all that's taken away from us, it only leaves us in despair and hopelessness. So in closing, I'd like to say miigwech for giving me this opportunity to share. It just seems that the time goes by so quickly, you know, when we only have 10 minutes to present. And it's only a very small amount of time that we can tell our story. So I hope that by having this presentation, and it is a lot of the information that I drew upon from Native Women's Association and the Homeless Hub that can be found. And a lot of times I become very involved in the community, which is very important to me. And I hope that this presentation will help understand a little bit of who I am, who we are here, and the work that I've been doing for the past 23 years. And I continue to do it for our people because it is needed. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Dolores, thank you. so much for the very rich presentation that you have given us in this, as you mentioned, very short period of time that you were given. And some of the things that I just want to highlight that you shared with us is the connection between the colonial context, the disruption of the roles of women and their relationship to land, their leadership roles in communities, that this was all disrupted and leads to now what is experienced in communities to domestic violence, but it's really connected to this law that has, you know, kind of ripped the rug from beneath the lives of Indigenous peoples, and certainly in your context in Canada as well. The statistics you shared with us are alarming, that the Indigenous communities in Canada represent 20 to 50% of the homeless population, when I believe the Indigenous population overall in Canada is about 4%. So this is really very alarming. And I know that they are similar statistics when you talk about high incarceration rates as well. So thank you for raising these hard realities and putting them out there for us, and the intergenerational trauma that people are having to deal with now. So I also want to thank you for the, you know, a point that connects also with Akikwe. Many points that you shared connect with her, and that need for belonging and human interaction is so much a part of homelessness, that people have been severed from their sense of belonging and the human interactions that help somebody to flourish in their life. So now I have the honor of introducing the work of Professor Jessie Thistle, who could not be with us here today in person, but gave us permission to share his work at this event. Jessie is a Métis Cree author and assistant professor at the Department of Humanities at York University in Toronto. Jessie is an advocate for the homeless, and his work involves reflection on his own experience, past experience of addiction and homelessness, and he has been recognized as having wide impact on the scholarly community and the greater public in Canada. So I now give the floor to Professor Jessie Thistle through this short video.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's one in.
You know, when I saw the numbers, for Indigenous homelessness, I was floored by how they compare to homelessness in the general population. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, it's 1 in 15 for Indigenous people in Canada will experience homelessness at some point in their life.
Compared
to Canadians is 1 in 128. So those numbers are huge. And then if you look at like the percentage of Indigenous peoples in a city, they make up maybe 1 to 3%. And in many cases, they're representing 30 to 40% of the homeless. So these numbers are huge, right?
And what's your best explanation for that gap?
Well, it's in the way that Indigenous peoples have been dispossessed of their lands, the way that their homes were targeted by state policy over time, and the way that funding is siloed. So it comes for on-reserve housing from the feds, from the federal government. And so people also travel for access to work and education. These are things that regular Canadians take for granted, and people from the north who are just trying to get healthcare come to the city and in the process to become homeless.
Can I ask you about your personal story? Because I mean, you have firsthand experience with both of those issues. I mean, being Indigenous and being homeless.
Yes. I cycled in and out of homelessness for 10 years, and it was in the way that my family was dispossessed of our land, and we had what's called intergenerational trauma within our family that eventually saw my family dissolve and raised elsewhere in Brampton with my grandparents. But that initial trauma led to a lot of, experimentation with drugs and whatnot in my early teens, which led to my homelessness in adulthood. And so you really have to look at the whole picture of my family's history to understand why I became homeless in my 20s.
And I'm trying to imagine what your life would have looked like while you were homeless. Can you describe that? Because this neighborhood was home for you, right?
Yeah, it's all around here. I have memories of places that I've been and slept and was traveling through. I could show you if you want.
Yeah. What are you talking about? So what are
Up here, I used to stay on the roof here. There's
this building right here?
Yeah, right here. This used to be a club, and I used to be able to climb up from the back, up on top, and stay on the roof because it's safer to stay on the roof than it is on the ground level when you're homeless, right? And if you look around here, there's all kinds of clues. Like if you look right in here, there's blankets stashed away. The way that people use the geography is different when you're homeless, right? And I remember I used to come here and sell stuff when I needed money, and so all through here, although it's changed quite a bit from when I was here, there's still a lot of the same things that are going on, right?
What's different about the neighborhood?
This is now a parking lot here. This is it's a Joe Fresh in our Loblaws now. Up here, I used to stay out. There was clubs here in the 90s that I used to stay at when I was like first homeless. I had to pay the entrance fee and be able to stay for 3 or 4 days, sleep on the floor, all through here. There used to be a dive bar that I could wash up over here. Right down the street, there's a McDonald's where I could stay at night if it was really cold. They don't disturb you, and you could wash up at Dundas and Bathurst there.
Does it feel a little bit surreal to be back here and to see all the old places?
Yeah, definitely. My stomach does flips, and I feel a little nervous and stressed out, and I can't help that. That's a physical reaction to being down in these places.
And a lot must have changed, but a lot has stayed the same.
Yeah, well, it's gentrified quite a bit, but the homeless haven't gone anywhere. They're all around, right? You just have to know where to look. Some of them are visible, but the majority aren't.
How hard was it to live life that way?
You're constantly stressed out. Sleep it solves a lot of your stress issues, and so you're hyper stressed all the time. Worried about food, and if you do know where food is, you have to travel a long distance to get it. You're always worried about your stuff because there's no place to stash it that's safe. It's just, I would say, stressful. That's the defining feature of it all.
And how did you pull yourself out of that?
Well, I use the justice system as a vehicle off the streets, a way to get into a rehab kind of instantly. That was one of the ways that I got the help that I needed, because I tried for many years, but all the rehabs had long waiting lists. And so I just couldn't access them because I didn't have a place to access them from, right?
It must have been pretty hard.
Yeah, it was hard to realize that nobody really cared. That was the hardest part. And then to be almost nameless in a lot of ways, You're traumatized by the poverty of just having to move from place to place for your own personal safety, always trying to find food, trying to make appointments that you don't have transportation funds to get to. So it's very difficult just to navigate the city, constantly, and never having the amount of rest that you need to be, healthy and operating at 100%.
So what does this country need to do?
The country needs to change the way that it looks at housing and property and stop thinking about it as a way to profit and realign it back to seeing it as a dwelling or a place of home.
Because for you, a home means what exactly?
Home is love. home is healthy social relations. It's a place to, it's a dwelling attached to a physical space, but like primarily I see it as like healthy social relations where one can flourish. And you need a dwelling, but you also need purpose and you need love. And to me, that's the all-encompassing of what a home is.
Jesse, wonderful to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you too, sir.
This
So we're really indebted to Jesse Thistle's experience and his academic work, along with the experience of the over 60 Indigenous persons who have experienced homelessness, who contributed to the work that he has done. And through this work, Jesse has identified 12 dimensions of homelessness, which I'm hoping my techie people are going to get up on the screen for us. These 12 dimensions of Indigenous homelessness in Canada have, I think, all been highlighted by our previous panelists, by Akikwe and Dolores. And on this slide, we will see a list of the 12 dimensions that Jesse includes in an Indigenous definition of homelessness in Canada. The link at the bottom goes to the source, which is an article, 43-page article that embellishes on each one of these dimensions. So everyone who is registered for this webinar today will receive this slide, so you'll have the link to this article, and these definitions are part of that. So that's all I wanted to say about that. You will be receiving that, and just the complexity of homelessness, and that some of these dimensions of homelessness are quite specific to Indigenous peoples in Canada. Thank you. You can stop sharing that slide. Great. So now I am very honored to introduce you to Don Franklin Atunish. He is an Indigenous Shuar leader from Metzanquim, Ecuador. Don Franklin is an educator for his community, and he also works to teach and promote the Shuar language. He also manages a local Shuar dance group, among other cultural contributions. Don Franklin will address us in Spanish, and Michelle Messias will serve as interpreter for the English speakers. She is the Goodwill Global Ambassador of Mexico and CAO, and the UN representative for the Man Up Campaign US Incorporated. So thank you, Franklin and Michelle. The floor is yours. We are now listening to you.
Muy buenos días. Mi nombre es Franklin Atunish. Soy representante de la comunidad Shuar, profesor de la escuela de la Esquivara de la comunidad de Metzanquim, del Cantón Limón Indanza, de la provincia de Morón, Santiago, de Ecuador. Un cordial saludo a todos los panelistas. Muy buenos días.
Good morning, all. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. My name is Franklin Antuish, and I am the representative of the community, of the Shuar community, and also an educator and professor from Ecuador. Thank you.
Hablando de cómo se llama de las mujeres marginadas, de las mujeres sin hogar, y en especial de las comunidades indígenas en el Ecuador, en la provincia de Morón, Santiago, hemos tenido un problema muy grande que es la marginación y el racismo. Y han sido también nuestras tierras y nuestros bosques han sido instalados. Ese problema se ha venido viviendo.
Talking about women that have been experienced marginalization or homelessness, and especially the indigenous communities and tribes here in Ecuador, we have been having this huge problem of racism and marginalization. And mostly we've been struggling with getting back our lands since they have been, the woods have been cut off and appropriated by the government.
Las mujeres sí, como se llama, ha sido uno de los problemas
Adelante.
muy radicales que ha habido en cuanto, en especial a las mujeres indígenas. Ellos han sufrido mucha marginación y han sido algunos despojadas de sus viviendas, no tienen viviendas algunos, y ese es un problema que a día acarrean y sufren, a consecuencia que tienen que salir a buscar una nueva vida en las ciudades, y existen muchos problemas en eso.
One of the radical problems that we're living and struggling, talking about women that are suffering marginalization and hitting homelessness, we see how women are left out without homes, without houses, and in consequence, they have to go to the cities and experience that, searching for a new life and for new incomes and stuff like that. And that has been one of the huge problems in my community. Adelante.
En cuanto al medio ambiente, se tiene problemas porque están ingresando lo que son las empresas transnacionales mineras con el objetivo de adueñarse sus territorios. Y eso existe un gran enfrentamiento en la provincia y dentro del cantón de Moindans. Y eso va a traer las consecuencias para nuestro vivir, porque nosotros, las comunidades Shuar, nosotros vivimos en comunión con la naturaleza.
Disculpe, don Franklin, ¿podría repetir lo último que dijo? Es que se estaba cortando mi internet.
Dije lo que nosotros, la nacionalidad Shuar, estamos sufriendo por problemas de minera que van a ingresar en nuestro territorio. Y eso va a traer consecuencias a nosotros en cuanto a la salud, a lo social, y por lo tanto nosotros estamos preocupados porque nosotros vivimos la selva, es nuestra casa. Es por eso que nosotros lo protegemos.
Gracias. So regarding the environment and one of the huge problems is that there are transnational mining enterprises that are taking our territories, and there has been like really huge problems between our communities and the transnational enterprises. And as a consequence, it has disregarded our form of living with our environment, with our communities, and between each other, and has been causing also consequences at social level, at health level, and we are really preoccupied because our home is this forest, and now it's been taken away, and we must protect it. Adelante.
Nosotros, la comunidad Shuar, en la provincia y en el cantón, hemos sido marginados desde años atrás. Todas las organizaciones seccionales no nos han prestado mucha ayuda en cuanto a los servicios básicos, en cuanto a las necesidades sociales. Es por eso que existen bastante pobreza en nuestra nacionalidad Shuar. Y por tal motivo también existe desnutrición en cuanto a los niños por falta de alimentos. Y también las mujeres sufren esas consecuencias. Algunos son abandonadas, otros han tratado de salir hacia adelante, pero hemos tenido muchos problemas en cuanto a eso.
We as the Shore community in the Canton province, we have been marginalized for the many years. And many of the international organizations haven't been really helpful to us, since what we need are the basic services and like social protection. And with that, one of the greatest consequences has been poverty and malnutrition in children and women that are being left behind, and many of them try to keep moving on, but still, like, that is one of the struggles that we're still facing nowadays. Adelante, señor.
El problema ha radicado en cuanto a la deforestación de las plantas, de los árboles, para introducir otros productos para la siembra. Entonces, esas han sido las consecuencias que ha causado dentro de nuestras comunidades. Y por tal razón, las comunidades Shore han ido mandando más allá, más alejando, despojando las tierras, enviándole más al fondo, más a territorios más lejanos. Entonces ha habido uno de los problemas. Pero por tal motivo nosotros nos hemos estado a pie de lucha en cuanto nos hemos organizado a través de centros, asociación y nuestra gran federación Shuar. Y eso nos ha protegido y por eso hemos estado siempre en pie de lucha a consecuencia de todo eso. Muchas gracias, muy amable.
Gracias, Don Franklin. Well, one of the problems that been rooted in the deforestation of our plants and the ending the environment of our animals, which has been just to introduce some other products in the agricultural system that aren't for us. So we don't have access to that food, and we have been like moving and changing territories from territories. So we feel like we don't even own our land anymore, and that we have been like trying to fight and stand against that as a community. So we have been trying to organize ourselves within the Shuar community and with the territories that have been left to us. ¿Algo más que desea agregar, señor Franklin?
Para cerrar, quiero felicitar a esta organización por ese empuje y adelante que hace en cuanto al valor que tiene la mujer. La mujer es lo primero, entonces por eso debemos valorarla y apoyarla y ayudarla. Es por eso que felicito a esta organización y seguir adelante. Estoy dispuesto en cualquier momento a colaborar y compartir con ustedes. ¡Viva las mujeres!
Muchas gracias, señor Franklin. So just as a closing, I want to congratulate this organization for opening a space and empowering women around the world and bringing that focus and priority that they need. And just like trying to keep moving this movement forward. And I just want to say that I am more than disposed to collaborate with you and try to still congratulate women, all the women that are here and women around the world. Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias a usted, señor Franklin.
Gracias, Don Franklin and Michelle, for this presentation. And you have raised some issues that have come from a different context, but are similar in some ways. The displacement from land, being forced off of land, the mining and extractive industries and the disruption that causes in communities, the social and health consequences. And I think the message of hope that Don Franklin brings to us is his respect for women, and the call that we all need to work together. Men and women need to be part of this together. So we really thank you and honor you for being here with us today. I will now introduce our speakers, next two speakers who will present together. They are Lara Hicks, who is a Master of Public Administration student at Syracuse University in the United States. She concentrates on international development and is completing a certificate of advanced study in civil society organizations. Lara is passionate about serving displaced families and refugees in the nonprofit space and advocating for survivors of relationships of violence on college campuses. Presenting alongside Lara will be Kieran Taylor. Kieran is the lead researcher and policy advocate at UNANIMA International, as well as an adjunct professor at St. John's University in Queens, New York, in the Department of Government and Politics. Kieran helps to bring the voices of those with lived experiences of homelessness and housing insecurity to the United Nations, accompanied by analysis of the existing data and literature. So the floor is now yours, Lara and Kieran.
Thank you, Sheila, for such a kind introduction. It's such a privilege to be here today, to be able to speak with you about these issues. I grew up in northern Minnesota and had a lot of Indigenous friends, and learning about Indigenous rights and history was a part of my curriculum. And it was such an honor to be able to learn about that growing up. And it's such an honor today to continue my work at UNANIMA International. So today I'm going to speak with you a little bit about what Don Franklin touched on, how mining-induced displacement can cause homelessness, specifically hidden homelessness, among Indigenous women and girls. So just to give you a lay of the land of some of the current mining practices that are taking place across the globe, approximately 50% of the world's remaining mineral resources are targeted by mining companies and customary lands claimed by Indigenous peoples. And even with introduced legislation to protect these lands, illegal mining continues, and people tend to overshadow the legislation and go into lands unannounced and use the resources that they're not entitled to. Mining also displaces Indigenous peoples and animals and denies access to and destroys lands and natural resources. And of course, it also erases traditional livelihoods. As a result, the lands have become more arid and unusable. So there's systemic land degradation that's really threatening and declining ecosystems that Indigenous communities are so dependent on. With mining, there's also an introduction of different people, diseases such as COVID-19 that's really threatening our Amazon populations, different substances, and even the introduction of roads can introduce different harms in the way of physical safety and health. So states and multinational corporations have responded to Indigenous communities and Indigenous defenders through force, either creating conflict or maybe pursuing legal charges against Indigenous representatives rather than standing in solidarity with Indigenous communities. Now let's add the gendered dimension to it. There are an estimated 476.6 million Indigenous peoples in the world, and over half of that number is comprised of Indigenous women. Indigenous women specifically, are 35 times more likely than non-Indigenous women to experience sexual-related violence. And Oxfam documented the killing of 55 Indigenous women defenders from 2016 to 2019, with a 97% increase in attacks on women defenders in the first quarter of 2019. In addition to these forms of violence that are more direct, there's also legislation that is not really in support of women's rights and gender-based discrimination and equity. The FAO found that less than 50% of all landholders are women. And it's really important to acknowledge this because there's often a dependency on the land that exists when Indigenous men are forced to leave and migrate to urban areas. It's the Indigenous women that are taking care of the crops and the lands. And if they don't have access to or ownership over those lands, then they're at increased risk of homelessness. So here is a graphic kind of depicting some of the forces that Dolores and Akikwe were talking about earlier. There are different kinds of violence. There's cultural and structural violence, which are more invisible. You don't see it because it seems normal. Structural violence is the injustice and exploitation that's built into our social systems. So the behavior of multinational corporations and governments and some of the ramifications of capitalism inflict structural violence onto Indigenous communities. This simultaneously leads to direct violence as a result of cultural violence. Cultural violence legitimizes the structural violence that we're seeing today and makes all of the different issues that you're seeing, the threat against Indigenous people and women, domestic abuse and violence and hidden homelessness, it seems normal through cultural violence. And with those two forms of violence, it manifests into direct violence. This is the violence you see when women defenders are being targeted by different mining communities. This is the kind of violence that you see when women defenders are being sexually assaulted, or there are disappearances that are going on among our Indigenous women in Canada. So these three different forms of violence really pair together in a triangular relationship. And all of it is an extension of colonialism, and mining is a colonial practice that continues today. So just trying to draw that connection to hidden homelessness and give a label to some of the forces that Dolores and Akikwe were talking about earlier. So that leads us to UNANIMA International's working definition of hidden homelessness. Homelessness does not just equate to being houseless. It is being housing insecure. Maybe you are going from hotel room to hotel room, or maybe your land is being threatened. Maybe you're suffering from abuse and you are forced in a position where you have to engage in sexual labor or forced labor. These are different forms of hidden homelessness. And in an Indigenous context, it's really important to remember how connected Indigenous communities are to their land. So a threat on natural resources and on the resources of Indigenous peoples in their communities and in their homes is a direct attack on Indigenous people themselves that will often render Indigenous women and girls homeless. It's just invisible to the naked eye and not covered by the media. So based on this definition, Indigenous women and girls are disproportionately at risk from suffering from hidden homelessness. So here I just have some examples of how structural violence and direct violence and cultural violence manifest themselves in the Americas, specifically Brazil and Canada. So as you can see here on the Brazil side, Dom Roque was talking about indiscriminate exploitation and how Indigenous peoples will be left at the edges of farms or on the sides of roads, and how they will have to abandon traditional ways of life. Although this is not directly related to being houseless, this is a form of hidden homelessness. And it has structural roots in how mining companies are displacing people in the Amazon. On the Canadian side, there's been discrimination, specifically housing discrimination, as Dolores talked about in depth, toward Indigenous women and girls. So they're unable to find proper housing and are forced to engage in sex in exchange for living in a home or finding a place to stay, things that they wouldn't experience otherwise if they just had the access to housing. And to conclude today, I wanted to give direct testimony again from Brazil and from Canada, on lived experiences of hidden homelessness among Indigenous women and girls. So on the Brazil side, there is an example here of how pro-mining policymakers attempting to legalize mining in different areas are threatening Indigenous peoples through direct violence. People are being targeted, and especially Indigenous women and girl defenders of the Amazon are being directly targeted. On the Canadian side, Marlene, who is an Indigenous woman from Vancouver, experienced severe trauma and rape as a result of being homeless in Canada. So these forms are here. We just have to look for them, and we have to expand our conversations to talk about homelessness and violence against Indigenous communities in a more inclusive way. We also need to reevaluate mining practices so that they're more respectful of our Indigenous communities, with a specific emphasis on Indigenous women and girls. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation today. I'll hand it over to Kieran.
Thank you so much, Lara. So if you can go to the next slide, and next slide, because apparently I forgot my title. So actually, Lara, I'm going to share my own screen if that's okay with you. So I always love and hate going last, just because everyone has said so many amazing things so far. I want to reiterate a lot of what has been said by people before me today. I think that I'm just very touched and moved by the conversation so far, and it just is another point where we need to return to this conversation and make sure that we're expanding not just UNANIMA International's research, but the global research surrounding homelessness to be more focused on this topic, because as we know, it is disproportionate for Indigenous peoples globally. And we also know that it's disproportionate for Indigenous women. So though I loved looking at Jesse Thistle's video today and hearing about his experience of homelessness, as he said in that video, so much of this homelessness is hidden, and so much of it is just beyond our comprehension of what those experiences even are like. I was speaking with someone about just getting to know the experiences of homelessness as a researcher, and the reality is that people who are sharing are often not the most traumatized, because they're able to even share their voice and participate with the platform. So we have so many stories out there and experiences that I think we can't even imagine. So I'm really happy that we're able to discuss this topic of Indigenous homelessness today. And I want to say thank you to everyone who presented before me, including Don Franklin, who's my friend from Ecuador, Puhamuk, and Yuminsamwe. And I think it's important to think about the international law aspects of this topic. We know that homelessness is actually a violation of civil rights and human rights. And that's something that many people actually don't comprehend, including some of our national leaders, some of our UN representatives, not to call anyone out specifically, but to reiterate that we need a paradigm shift so that homelessness is viewed as what it is, a human rights and a civil rights violation. And so I think that's important, and also looking at the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, within which housing is specified as a right. So we see that international law is actually being broken by the current global situation of not only just having homelessness, both hidden and visible, but just the rising rates of this and the systemic trends and structures that are leading to this homelessness occurring. I really appreciate that these other panelists have talked about the historical marginalization, which leads to the current situations. And I just want to reiterate what I've heard also today and what's been reported in our publication, Hidden Faces of Homelessness, International Research on Families, Volume 2, which profiles Canada. The Indian Act in Canada has been called out as racist and problematic by Indigenous activists, including today. So I think that's one example of a legislation that we need to examine more thoroughly and we need to bring attention to. With the human rights-based approach, we would be able to attribute decision-making power and sovereignty to individuals, families, and communities in a way that we're not currently doing. So I think the human rights-based approach for research and then also for any policies, any housing solutions is essential. Relating this a little bit more explicitly to the SDGs, here is just a little excerpt from our publications, which we'll be sending out in the follow-up email. But just to say that a lot of the problems currently occurring with land grabbing and for the housing which is being disturbed as a result of mining or deforestation, other massive and large-scale development projects, those are actually really hurting the globe, everyone globally. It's when we have this thing like the United Nations 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to really consider how we are all interconnected. And you see that with the presentations today. These are intersectional issues, such as what Akikwe shared about homelessness and human trafficking, or what we see about land grabbing and homelessness. So we see that large-scale homelessness or a cause of homelessness then affecting the individual and family level, but we're not necessarily connecting that when we see individual cases of homelessness, saying like, oh, this is actually a result of a system or something that's happening large scale. So I think that's really important to identify. Other international legislation that's very relevant is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which basically ensures that consumption and production do not negatively affect the livelihoods of people, and that we succeed in recognizing the intersections between the economy, social, and cultural components of life. And so that's something we also need to refer to and uphold. I wanted to highlight some Indigenous voices today, and I know we are running low on time, so I will make sure that all of these materials are shared with you later. But this is from Melina Lobukun Massimo, who is the founder and director of Sacred Earth Solar. And she does a lot of great work in Canada. And she basically just says that it's not a secret that Indigenous communities in Canada experience the highest rates of suicide, homelessness, poverty, and that these issues are very much affecting them. It's not a secret. So how come United Nations and a lot of people have not brought the focus necessary to these topics? We know that homelessness in itself is not a new problem. However, the international attention to homelessness has been very minimal until 2020 with the Commission for Social Development. So why is that? We do see a lot of progress happening in the last few years. For one example, Pablo Alvarenga won this Sony Photo Award, where he basically was able to make a project called Seeds of Resistance, where it seeks to show the stories of the struggle for people bonding with their ancestral territory and also visioning the threats that are facing those communities in those territories. We heard today from Akikwe, this land isn't ours, it's the animals. And then we heard later from Don Franklin, La selva es nuestra casa. That means the jungle is our home. So if we're really considering that perspective and honoring that perspective, which very much resonates with me, we have to think about the fact that the effects on the land are creating homelessness, but they're also having such a effect on our spirits, on our mental well-being, and that also drives homelessness and creates another form of homelessness, such as being out of home. I see, Sheila, that we're out of time. So what I want to do is just share this presentation with you and to thank everyone for being here today. I think it's very important that we continue to explore the Sustainable Development Goals in the next decade of action so that we can achieve those goals while being inclusive of marginalized groups globally. And a lot of that is bringing attention to women and girls' experiences. So thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you very much, Lara and Kieran. And I just want to say that your work, you know, that your last few sentences there, Kieran, kind of summarized very well what we have experienced here today, and the importance of your work as scholars in translating experience into data that can be used in these formats of policy and decision making, and how this is really an important part of solutions. But I think today has taught us that this is a very good example that Indigenous peoples' voices need to be central in these conversations, not only as consultants, but as policymakers and decision makers. And that if we really want to achieve the UN 2030 agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, and leave no one behind, that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples has to be part of that framework. And so I'd like to just thank everyone who has been part of today's event, the panelists, and all of you participants. I'm very sorry that there isn't time for interaction here, but obviously we need to have another conversation. So we will find a way to make that happen in the future. But for anyone who does want to continue that conversation now, I invite you to be in touch with the organizers and we can try and point you in the right direction. I've put our contact information in the chat box. Akikwe has also put a link to her presentation in the chat box. So now I would like to call again on Grandmother Isabel Miwasaki to close us out of this event. Isabel.
Miigwetz, thank you very much, Sheila. I'm really, my heart is uplifted, you know, to know that all the people are taking homelessness of the Indigenous female very seriously. And I believe that we can do this, whatever it is. So I'm going to offer a prayer for Thanksgiving. We were thankful, we're grateful for everything that we've got. Jamanado, great mystery, giver of all of life and the creator of all things. We give thanks for the human beings who are remembering that they are vessels of your love. We give thanks for those who are willing to set aside the human differences and to embrace human similarities. We are grateful for those who are willing to put aside the conflict, the bitterness and pain of hundreds of years of inhumanity where nations fought against nations. And now, Jamanado, we ask for peace. We give thanks for the pathways being created by the spirits of our ancestors who taught us to honor all our relations, every race and color of humankind and every living thing. We give thanks for the Mother Earth and for all that she has provided for us. And we give thanks for the love that is being offered to every child of Earth through your eternal wisdom, forgiveness, and grace. We ask that life, unity, and equality for eternity may grace this human family so that we may learn respect for each other, respect for our brothers and sisters, the creatures.
Isabel, if you can hear us, we've lost We've lost you.
Are we okay?
Yes, you're back. Oh, you've frozen again.
And may the Great Spirit keep us in peace and grace. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Grandmother Isabel, and to everyone for being here. Have a good day, afternoon, evening, and we'll see you again.
Kwama Pi.